Hey yo, welcome to the next installment of our epic Ableton 11 deep dive series where we're going to investigate Ableton 11 in depth, but also look into music production, into workflow, into mindset stuff, into philosophies, into whatever you want to see. If you want to drop a comment and let me know if you have any questions, all that awesome stuff. And welcome once again. And we're going to start with another important quote, especially in the fields of music production and art in general, is that doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will. And there's a lot of us that get limited by self-doubt, by imposter syndrome, by fear of judgment of others, or you feel you're not worthy enough. And I just want to encourage you that that is the biggest enemy, is your own self-doubt, because failure is really not that big a deal, because failure is the best teacher you will ever get. And it's all about your perspective on how you see roadblocks, how you see obstacles, how you see setbacks. And if you see all of those failures in brackets as opportunities to learn, as opportunities to grow, as opportunity to develop yourself as a human, as an artist, you will overcome and blossom and flourish into any direction you want to. And I want to encourage you in that. This might seem a little cheesy. It might not seem a little cheesy, but I just want to inspire you that yes, you can do it. And maybe think a little bit about the motivation of why you want to be doing this, because the root word of motivation is motive. And if you have a very strong motive, if you really want to produce your own music, if you really want to express something and share it with the world, if you really want to freelance your services, if you really want to produce other artists, if you really want to start a career and brand yourself as an artist, if you want to be a thought leader, if there's any of those ambitions that really resonate deeply with you, I encourage you to keep reminding yourself of that, because if you have a very strong motive, your motivation will come from that. And then we're going to be able to keep going through the series together. You're going to learn a ton. You're going to get inspired. You're going to get creative. You're going to make some amazing music. And I'm looking forward to hearing it. All right, so that's how we're starting this video. And let's actually move back to Ableton. So in the last video, what did we cover? We actually just covered setting up your audio interface. We set up your preferences. We learned a couple shortcuts. We learned how to open our preferences, Command, comma, and we learned how to open up this info box with Shift question mark on Mac. And that info box will help you learn as you start to learn this software. And in this video, I want to dive deeper into the Ableton UI so you can actually familiarize yourself a little bit with what you're looking at so it doesn't look so alien, it doesn't look so overwhelming. So let's break it down. All right, one thing to note about Ableton is that as it was designed, they designed this to not have any pop-up windows, because in other softwares you might have the MIDI editor pops up or the mixer editor pops up into another window, and you have all these stacked windows, and then before you know it, you start to get kind of overwhelmed and unsure of where things are. So one great thing about Ableton is that you don't really have pop-up windows. You more so have these collapsible boxes that you can open and close with these little arrows that you can see. So you see there's an arrow here, there's a little arrow down here. And what this does is if you click this arrow, it collapses that box and gives you a little bit more screen real estate. You can do the same thing over here. You can collapse this box, you get more room, and you can open it up. And the power of this is that everything in Ableton has its place. So once you learn where things are, you never have to worry about where to find a feature, where to find a view. So that's one super powerful thing about Ableton. All right, so first and foremost, this info view is super handy and I encourage you to use it, right? So if we go over, let's say, this play button, it tells you what the play button does, right? Click to start playback. If we go to this other button, the stop button, click to stop playback, right? With a little description. If we go here, this is the arrangement record button. This is a little bit more advanced. It has a description there. We're going to go through all of these features and show you real-time examples of how to use them. But for now, I just want to zoom out and give you an overview of the UI of all the things so it doesn't look so unfamiliar. All right, so the first thing that I want to bring your attention to is the main feature of Ableton, which is session view and arrangement view. All right, and session view is literally this big box here. All right, the big box that we see these tracks in. Okay, this is what it's called, session view. And you'll notice that there's these little tiny tabs at the top right corner. If you click this other tab, oh, this view just changed. This is what is called arrangement view. And get out your little note of your keyboard shortcuts that you're keeping track of, because this is a very important shortcut that you need to memorize. And it's simple. All it is you hit tab, and you can cycle between these two views very easily just by hitting tab. So that's one you definitely want to remember. All right, and the way that Ableton works is that you have two views to play around with looking at your project, and they are linked. However, they are very different at the same time. And this is kind of what sets Ableton apart, and it's what makes it so powerful, in my opinion. The way that you want to think about session view is kind of similar to a typical mixer that you might see in another DAW, where you have all these different tracks that typically have different sounds. So you might have one track for your drum kit, you might have one track for a bass sound, you might have one track for your vocals, etc., etc., etc. And then you have your master bus at the end here, which is the master fader for all of the sounds, because all of your tracks here are being routed to this master fader. You can control the volume of all of your tracks with this master fader here. And these are what are called return tracks, which we won't get into right now. All right, so the general overview of session view is that you can actually play around with multiple what are called clips in Ableton. And clips are basically the bread and butter of what Ableton works with. So a clip can be an audio clip, it can be a loop, it can be a sample, it can be a MIDI clip that's triggering a device, and we're going to get into all that later. It can be pretty much anything, but it just represents an idea. It represents a sound, right? And the power of session view is that you can have multiple different ideas of the same sound. So let's say you have a drum kit on this track. You can have multiple different drum beats, drum grooves, loops, all on one track, and you can have the same thing on multiple tracks, and you can mix and match them. And the way that you mix and match them is that they are all consistently looping. And the power of this is that every loop could have its own length. You could have a loop that is super short, you could have a different loop that's very long, and they'll overlap in different ways, but they'll always be in time with each other. And then you could decide to trigger different ideas from different tracks with other ideas of other tracks that you've never tried before. And the whole power of this is that you can actually audition ideas. You can play around with different loops and different samples together without committing it to a timeline. All right, and in this view, ideas are just looping indefinitely. They will loop forever and ever and ever and ever until they move themselves into a whole other dimension and then keep looping and keep looping. You get the idea. Typically, all of these loops are not bound by structure. And what I mean is that they're not in a timeline, because if you listen to any song, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, and there's a forward progression of time. And that's not what we're dealing with here. However, if we move over to arrangement view, so we'll hit tab, you'll see that we have a timeline. All right, we have something that's moving across time. And this is more typically what you'll see in other DAWs. And this is where you'll arrange your songs into a time-bound structure so that you can actually listen to it in a timeline. All right. And these two views are actually completely separate from each other, although they're linked. And I'll show you this in just a quick second. You can actually drag ideas from arrangement back into session view, and you can grab clips here and you can drag them into your arrangement and pencil in an arrangement that way. All right, we're going to dive deeper into the details of both of these views and what's featured in these tracks and the layout of it a little bit later. But for now, let's keep going. All right, the next view we're going to look at is this browser view. And we briefly looked at this in the last video, but basically this is where everything is hosted for you to populate into session and arrangement view. All right, so whether it's an instrument, whether it's a loop, whether it's a sample, whether it's an effect, whatever it is, it all lives in your browser. All right, so real quick, what we're going to do is play around with a couple clips. All right, so what we're going to do is go to the samples tab, and if you have Ableton 11 Suite installed, you should have a plethora of samples to play with, and they should pop up here. All right, and one great thing about Ableton is you can search in the top left-hand corner of your browser, and let's just type in drums. All right, so now we're gonna have all of these drum loops that we can listen to. All right, so let's say we find one we like. All you have to do to populate any cell is to click and drag it. All right, so since this is an audio loop, you're gonna wanna click and drag this into an audio track, all right? And Ableton's default layout, you should have 2 MIDI tracks and you should have 2 audio tracks. So go ahead and find a loop you like and then drag it into that cell of an audio track. Now we're going to X this out, and now we're gonna hit bass. Hit enter, and let's find a bass line. So let's say we like this bass line, okay? Let's drag this into the next audio clip. And now we have clips loaded inside these tracks. So if you click one of these little arrows beside the clips that you just loaded, it's gonna start playback. And it's going to loop around and around. And I'm just showing you this so you can get an idea of what Session View is about. So this drum loop will just keep looping around over and over. And let's say I wanted to start playback of this bass line that we liked. I'm just gonna click that. Right, so now we have these 2 loops going together. And they're just gonna keep looping around and around. Right, you can change the volume here. We'll get into all this stuff a little bit later, but let's say you wanted to find a different bass line. So I'm just gonna hit space bar to stop playback, or you could hit the stop button up here to stop playback. And we're gonna go find a different bass line. So let's take this bass line and drag it onto a different cell on that same track that had our first bass line. And what we can do is we're gonna just hit spacebar again, or you can hit play up here. So we'll hit play. What we can do is actually play the second bass line we've loaded, and it will stop the first one from playing and play the second one in a loop. So I'll hit play. Right, so now we're auditioning that same drum beat with a different bass line. Do the same thing with a drum beat or any sound or any clip. This is what's so powerful about Session View, is you can have these different loops, these different ideas, and play them in different combinations with each other across multiple tracks and start generating cool different ideas, start getting into flow state and auditioning different things without committing to a song structure. As opposed to an arrangement view, we are bound to a timeline. So for example, if I wanted to click this cell, and while I'm holding the click, hit tab, you'll see that it allows me to drag it over to arrangement view. And this will actually bring us to a timeline. So in this view, we are not looping, right? So if I click here and play back, it's just gonna play through this bass line once over, right? Because it's time bound to a structure. If we wanted to hear it over and over again, we'd have to duplicate this bass line multiple times. And don't worry if I'm getting too ahead of you with moving stuff around and zooming in and out and duplicating tracks. We'll get into all that later, but I just want you to conceptualize, all right, well, arrangement view is timeline. It's where you're gonna arrange your song. So we're gonna take your ideas from session view and paint them into a structure. And then session view is basically where you can interface with different loops, different ideas, and audition how they sound together without necessarily committing to a song structure. And there's a lot of cool ways that you can link these two modes together, which will really spark your creativity. All right, so let's continue down the browser view. And the top here is what are called your categories. And this is basically just folders where you can save some of the favorite tools, the favorite instruments, the favorite effects, the favorite samples, folders that you find, and organize them into your favorite folders. So the sounds tab is basically just an interface that shows you all bunch of different categories of sounds that you have access to. So bass sounds, brass sounds, effects, exotic, experimental, synth sounds, pads, all these different things. And it will give you a glimpse inside all of the different instruments and presets that you have inside Ableton, organized by sounds. Drums is the same thing as sounds, but they have their own tab because you have so many drum kits and drums work a little bit differently than melodic instruments in Ableton, which we will get into later. Next is your instruments. So these are actually the instruments that are built into Ableton. So most of these are synthesizers, and they're all different types of synthesizers. You have drum synthesizers, you have samplers, you have all these different cool instruments that you can create your own presets that are super in depth. So these are all basically instruments that you can learn, that you can create your own sounds, that you can get presets for, you can expand and play around with. They're basically their own instruments. So imagine having physical synthesizer, but in virtual form. You have a bunch of them here in Ableton to explore and play with. So the next tab is audio effects, and this is where all of your effects live. So basically, after you design sounds with your instruments, or maybe you find preset that you like, you can add effects such as delay, such as reverb, such as EQ. There's a plethora of effects to explore in Ableton, and they live here. So the next tab is what are called MIDI effects, and these are effects that affect MIDI tracks only, and it's super cool and creative, all the stuff that you can do with MIDI effects. We won't get into that right now, but this is where they live. Next is Max for Live, and this is a little bit more advanced, where you can actually download tools that people have created for Ableton. You can create your own plugins for Ableton. It's pretty in depth. It's a whole other world. We'll probably get into this way later in this series. Next is plugins. So if you have any third-party plugins that you've downloaded from the internet or that you've bought online, they will pop in here. We'll get into that, setting all that up in a later video. Next is clips. So Ableton comes with built-in clips that you can just audition and drag directly into session view, or drag directly into arrangement view to start playing around with and edit yourself. Next is samples. So Ableton has a bunch of cool samples, bass lines, pads, performances, vocal loops, all sorts of stuff that you can browse in your samples view. Next is grooves. So this is actually a bunch of different groove templates that you can apply to MIDI sequences. You can apply it to audio sequences, to drum beats, and change the groove of those elements from here. So this is where they live. We'll get into all this stuff later, so don't worry. This is just a general overview. And then finally, we have templates here. So you can actually save your own templates. You can save multiple templates if you have different workflows for different types of projects. If you have different things you're experimenting with, this is where your templates live. And there's a bunch that are built into Ableton when you get started. If we keep moving on, we have what are called packs, and these are extra content, extra instruments that you download from Ableton, and depending what version of Live, you're going to have different amounts of packs that you can access. In the Suite version, you have access to all of their packs, which is a lot, and you can download all these packs directly from the browser. Instead of having to go to Ableton, you can directly download them from here. Next is the user library, and this is where, if you have any presets that you've saved, if there's anything that you've created, any groove tracks you've made, any clips you've done, you can save them to your user library, and you can actually move them throughout songs and different projects and see if they work amongst them. Super powerful stuff. Next is the current project. So this will show you all the clips and all the stuff that is currently going down in the project that you're working on. And then you can actually, these are just folders that I've added, my external hard drives that I frequently interface with, but you can add any folder on your computer. So it could be your desktop, it could be a folder where you're downloading samples online from and you want to access it in Ableton. You can add any folder you want right here. All right, the next area I want to focus on is this bottom area over here, and this is what is called your clip view. And this will actually enable you to look more in depth into your audio clips and your MIDI clips and whatever devices you're working with in detail there. So for example, if I double click on this clip up here, and I open up this menu, you'll see we get a more in-depth view of what's going on in that clip. All right, and in here you can edit stuff, you can automate stuff, you can play around with the sound, you can do all sorts of crazy cool stuff within the clip view, whether it's an audio clip or MIDI clip. All right, and the other view here is where your devices will live. So let's say we went into our audio devices and we grabbed like a delay and we wanted to put this one on. You could click and drag it here, and all of your devices that are on this track will appear here with all of their details that you can manipulate and play around with in this view. And we're going to do in-depth videos on all of these features and really zooming in on specific features. But right now, I just want to give you an overview so you can understand what you're looking at. All right. So to go back and forth between your clip view and the device view. So with these two tabs at the bottom here, you can navigate between your clip view and your device view. So if you click on this clip, you'll bring up the clip view. And if you click on the device view, it'll bring up the devices for that track. And if I double click on a different track, you'll see that the audio clip has changed to represent the clip that's going on this track. All right, and finally, we're going to talk about the transport view, which is everything on this top bar here. All right, with the play, stop, and record button, and all of these features and all of these buttons is what is called the transport menu. And this will always stay there regardless of what view you're in. All right, it's always going to be there. And this allows you to do things such as set your tempo, turn on your metronome, change the time signature. It allows you to start playback, stop playback, record things, set loops, MIDI capture, all of these cool things. It allows you to map MIDI, and we're going to get into all of this stuff, but just know that the transport bar lives at the top there, and all of the features will be accessible for there. We're going to zoom in on all of these things so you understand it, you can utilize it, get creative with it, but we're just still getting warmed up to looking at Ableton. So with all that covered, we covered session view. You hit tab, you get to arrangement view. All right, we hit tab to get back. We know that this is our browser where all our instruments live, all our effects live. We know that this is our clip view, so that whatever clip is loaded inside a track or whatever idea you're working with, you can double click on it to bring up a more in-depth view to edit it farther and to go more in depth. And we've learned that the second tab at the bottom here is your device view. So if you have like effects going on, if you have a synthesizer going on, it will pop up here so you can open it up and mess around with it some more. We have our info box, which is always handy here. And then we have our transport menu at the top, which will allow you to start playback, stop playback, record stuff, set your tempo, all of those. And once again, if you're just getting started with music production and feeling completely overwhelmed or having trouble finishing projects or just want to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that helps you go from your first ideas all the way to a finished mix and master. It's super handy to have around the studio as a printout. So if you're interested, you can download that below, and we will go deeper inside that workflow later on in the series when we start making music together and finishing music and going through the various processes of production together. So if you want to get a glimpse and start learning about it ahead of time, I encourage you to download that right now. All right, so if you have any questions about this, or if there's anything that you want me to cover in this series as we move forward, go ahead and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. I'm happy to start a conversation. If you got value out of this video, go ahead and hit the like button. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the videos in the upcoming series. And hey, if you have any friends that you know would love to get into music production, or they're musicians and you know they would create something amazing by learning the software and learning the production workflow, then go ahead and share it with them, right? The more the merrier on this journey of discovering this stuff, developing our artistry, developing our musicality, our mindset, so that you can start producing and releasing your music to the whole world. All right, so that wraps it up for this video, and we'll see you in the next one.